The noise exploded all at once, dry and heavy, as if something had fallen inside the yard. I was so startled that I backed away even before understanding what was happening. The ground shook under my paws, and the air scent changed. It wasn't the smell of morning, it was dust, metal, and broken things. I ran to the gate and stuck my snout between the bars. Across the street, a huge machine moved slowly. A yellow arm rose, stopped at the top, and came down hard against the neighbor's wall. The impact came with a crash that made my chest vibrate. I barked loudly many times. That wasn't there yesterday. It shouldn't be there. Another blow. The wall cracked. A piece fell. The dust rose and moved through the street like smoke. I took a few steps back without taking his eyes off it. Strange people walked back and forth, talking loudly, laughing. No one seemed worried. Carlos appeared at the door, leaning his weight more on one leg than the other. He stopped beside me and stood looking in silence. Anna came right after, still adjusting her robe, her hair tied up any which way. The two stood motionless, as if they needed a few seconds to accept what they were seeing. I barked again and started walking around the yard, going back and forth. The noise wouldn't stop. Each hit made the wall vibrate. Anna put her hand to her chest and took a deep breath. Carlos muttered something low, without taking his eyes off the machine. I recognized the tone. It wasn't surprise, but an old discomfort. The house next door had always been quiet. I remember the green gate, the sound of the door opening early, and the smell of coffee escaping to the street. The man used to come out slowly, leaning on his cane, and would stop to pet me as he passed. It had been a few days since that sin had vanished. Now, in its place, there was dust, hurried footsteps, and unfamiliar voices. The machine's arm came down again, and part of the wall collapsed, lifting a cloud that invaded the yard. I sneezed and backed away. The dust stuck to my snout and the plants near the wall. Anna went quickly inside and came back with a glass of water. She handed it to Carlos, who sat down slowly in the chair, stretching his leg with care. The two spoke little, scattered words, almost swallowed by the noise. I heard the neighbor's name. Then, a short sentence that changed the mood for good. He had died suddenly. There was no explanation, no comment. The tractor kept working, as if that information had no weight at all. Men began to leave the house, carrying things, doors, pieces of wood, objects that no longer seemed to belong to anyone. None of that smelled like a home. It smelled like abandoned things. I approached the wall, feeling the vibration pass through the concrete, while the sound entered without permission, occupying everything. I looked at the space next door and tried to find something familiar. I didn't find it. Where there was once shade, now there was only movement. Something was being erased there, and I didn't know what was coming next. I felt like digging, barking louder, running until I was tired. I did none of that. I stayed near Carlos and Anna, alert. When another part of the house fell, I didn't bark, I just watched. The dust rose. The sun advanced in the sky, and the entire street seemed to watch, in silence, the disappearance of something that had always been there. The yard seemed smaller. The day went on, and I knew, without fully understanding why, that this morning was not an ordinary one. I woke up to the sound of the door slamming hard, in a way that doesn't usually happen there. It wasn't a normal close. It was a sharp push, followed by hurried footsteps down the hallway. I lifted my head while still lying down, my body tense, scenting the air. There was a smell that hadn't been part of the house for a long time. It was familiar, but it came heavy, mixed with something bitter. I got up slowly, walking in circles in the yard, sniffing every corner, my eyes fixed on any movement. Carlos was inside the house, messing with papers scattered across the table. I called for his attention with a short bark, but it didn't work. Anna took 2 steps, and the cloth fell from her hand. I ran to her, circling slowly, sniffing the floor and the fallen objects, feeling every different scent that mixed into the air. My body remained tense, ears up, alert to any sign. She stopped and rested her hand on the chair, as if she had given up on standing. I barked louder and walked from one side to the other, checking the floor, the air, and every object out of place. Carlos appeared, his hand on his face, trying to understand, but without taking his eyes off the situation. I moved between him and Anna, ready to react to any danger, sniffing and circling. Anna tried to drink water, but she couldn't hold it properly. Some of it fell on her shirt. Time seemed to rush and freeze at the same time. I leaned down to sniff the spilled liquid, checking if there was anything else strange on the floor. Every movement of hers made me circle, alert to sounds and scents in the yard. A neighbor appeared at the gate, attracted by the noise. I gave a short bark, calling attention. She entered without waiting for an answer, bringing a glass of water. Anna tried to drink again, but spilled some of it. I continued circling, smelling every space, alert to any movement from the neighbor or the street. The sound of the siren arrived before the ambulance. I ran to the gate, barked, and went back to the yard, keeping my body tense. 2 people entered carrying equipment. They asked firm questions. Carlos answered as best as he could, while I kept circling around Anna, sniffing every corner, staying alert to the footsteps and the sound of the distant wheels. Anna was placed on the stretcher. The yard grew tight, full of footsteps and voices. I approached, ready for any signal, circling and sniffing. Carlos held me by the collar, so I wouldn't climb in with her. The ambulance door closed with a dry thud. The vehicle left quickly. The street went silent right after, but I stayed alert, observing every corner, scenting the air. Carlos stood still in the middle of the yard, looking at the closed gate. He was breathing heavily. He sat down slowly in the chair and passed his hand over his face. The neighbor said something quietly, placed her hand on his shoulder, and left. The house seemed too big now. I went inside and walked through the rooms, circling, sniffing every corner. Everything was in the same place, but the air felt heavy with a tension different from before. Carlos entered later, leaning against the walls. He sat on the sofa and stayed there quiet. I lay down near him, but moved my head at every sound of the clock or the refrigerator. Each noise made my body react, ready for any sign. The day went on, but the sense of alert remained alive, in the air and on the yard half closed. Anna? She answered quietly, very quietly. Carlos approached carefully, leaning his weight more on one leg. He tried to help, but Anna seemed to have no strength even to lift her head. He called her name again, louder now. I barked without stopping, walking in circles, feeling the heavy air in the yard. Carlos grabbed his phone with difficulty. His hands were shaking. He spoke quickly, words tripping over each other. While he spoke, he tried to keep Anna awake, asking her to look at him. A neighbor appeared at the gate, attracted by the noise. She said something I didn't pay attention to and entered without waiting for an answer. She brought a small cup of water. Anna tried to drink, but couldn't hold it properly. Part of the water fell on her shirt. Time became strange. It seemed to rush and freeze at the same time. Carlos walked from one side to the other, leaning on the furniture. The neighbor spoke loudly, giving orders that no one followed properly. I stayed near Anna, watching every movement. The sound of the siren arrived before the ambulance appeared on the street. I ran to the gate and barked, warning. The vehicle stopped fast. 2 people entered the yard carrying equipment. They spoke firmly, asked things, and Carlos answered as best as he could. Anna was placed on a stretcher. The yard felt cramped, full of footsteps and voices. I tried to climb in with her, but Carlos held me by the collar. The ambulance door closed with a dry thud. The vehicle left quickly. The street went silent right after, as if nothing had happened. Carlos stood still in the middle of the yard, looking at the closed gate, breathing heavily. He sat down slowly in the chair and passed his hand over his face. The neighbor said something quietly, put her hand on his shoulder, and left. The house seemed too big now. I went inside and walked through the rooms. Everything was in the same place. Nothing had changed, yet the air was different. Carlos came in later, leaning against the walls, and sat on the sofa, quiet. I lay down nearby, alert to any sound. The clock made too much noise, and the refrigerator turned on and off. Every small noise seemed loud. The day went on, but without rhythm. The house stayed in waiting, me too, because that morning, I learned that not every silence means rest. Sometimes, it just means that someone hasn't come back yet. The doorbell rang 3 times in a row without a pause. That wasn't a visitor's way. It was a hurry. I lifted my head immediately and went to the door, barking before Carlos even moved. He appeared in the hallway, walking slowly, leaning against the wall. He looked through the peephole, sighed, and opened the door carefully. The woman entered quickly, without waiting for an invitation. Her eyes were red, and her bag hung off only one shoulder. She threw the bag on the sofa and started talking before she even stopped walking, her words tripping over each other. As soon as she passed me, I felt the strong scent of nervousness. "I can't do it anymore," she said. "I'm not going back to that house." Carlos closed the door slowly and stood there listening. She kept walking through the living room, pointing at things that had nothing to do with what she was saying. She spoke about her husband, the fights, the sleepless nights. She said she had left home with few things and needed to stay there for a while. Carlos answered shortly. He said she needed to think better, that leaving like that didn't solve anything. She stopped walking and turned quickly. "You want me to go back there?" she asked, now with a louder voice. He rested his hand on the table. His leg trembled slightly. He said that wasn't it. He said she needed to talk, to try to resolve it. He spoke about the marriage as if it were still something that could be fixed. She laughed without humor. She said she had already tried, that she was tired, that she couldn't stand arguing every day anymore. She grabbed her bag and started rummaging through it, looking for something that didn't seem important. "I just need to stay here for a bit," she said, "just until I get things organized." Carlos took a deep breath. He said the house wasn't big, that they also had problems. He spoke quietly but firmly, explaining that he couldn't take on any more of that mess right now. The mood changed for good. She raised her voice and said it was always like this. That when she needed him, he set limits. I felt the tension rise and placed myself between the two, standing still, alert. Carlos slammed his hand on the cabinet door. The noise echoed through the kitchen. "It's not the time," he said. "Not like this." She went silent for a second. Her eyes filled with water, but she didn't cry. She picked up the bag from the sofa and went to the door. She opened it with force and stopped before leaving, waiting for him to say something different. Carlos didn't move. The door slammed. The sound stayed in the air for a few seconds before disappearing. The house became quiet again, but heavy. Carlos walked slowly to the chair and sat down, stretching his leg with care. I went to him and leaned my head on his leg. He passed his hand over my neck without saying anything. The doorbell didn't ring again, and I understood that the conversation hadn't ended yet. It had just stayed suspended, occupying the house's space. I woke up to silence. Not that silence of the early morning, but another kind. Strange, as if something had been switched off. I opened my eyes while still lying in the yard and realized that no noise was coming from the lot next door. No machine, no voices, no dust in the air. The air seemed too still. I got up and went to the wall. Where there was once movement, Now there was only empty space. Overturned earth, small pieces of rubble scattered around, and nothing else. The sun hit right there, finding no shade. The yard seemed larger, open too much for a place that always had a house leaning against it. I stood still for a few seconds, observing. I walked from one side to the other, feeling the ground warmer. The wind passed differently, with nothing to block it. Everything was too visible. Carlos came out later, walking slowly, leaning his weight more on one leg. He stopped near the wall for a few seconds, as if he were still expecting some sound. Anna appeared right after. They spoke little. Everything seemed too normal for a place that had changed so much. But something in that silence didn't fit. I smelled it first. It was weak, fast. It came and went before it could settle. It wasn't dust. It wasn't a plant. It was something alive, but restless. I lowered my snout and followed the trail to near the wall. There, the scent disappeared suddenly. Then I heard a short sound. Almost nothing. A dry scratching interrupted. It seemed to stop when I moved and return when I moved away. I walked in circles, always returning to the same point. My body was tense, ears up. I couldn't lie down again. I stayed between the wall and the table, observing, trying to understand where it came from. Anna was walking through the yard without noticing. Carlos was nearby, holding the hose, letting the water run slowly over the ground. The sound returned, faster this time. Something small suddenly came out of the rubble and crossed the yard too fast. A rat. It passed very close to Anna's foot. She screamed and ran without looking back. Carlos was startled instantly. He dropped the hose, still full of water, and ran after Anna without understanding what was happening. I bolted forward, barking, following the movement of the rat until it disappeared near the wall. The yard turned into noise for a few seconds. Hurried footsteps, loud breathing, and the sound of the dropped hose, with water gushing uncontrollably in the yard. Then everything stopped. Anna stood near the door, hand on her chest, breathing fast. Carlos arrived right behind her, confused, trying to understand. He looked at the floor, then at the wall, as if he expected to see something coming out of there again. It must have come from the house, Anna said, still nervous. Carlos nodded. He picked up a piece of wood and hit the ground near the wall, making noise, taking a few steps forward. I followed along, sniffing every corner, going back to the same spots as before. Nothing came out, but the smell hadn't completely disappeared. The yard didn't seem the same anymore. Even quiet, it seemed occupied. The rest of the day followed with more care. Doors stayed closed for longer. No one walked distracted. I started to circulate more, lying in different places, always with one eye on the wall and the other on the floor. In the late afternoon, the sun hit the empty lot hard. Without the house, the heat entered faster. The silence continued there in the same way, but it no longer seemed harmless. When it got dark, we went in. Carlos turned off the lights, and Anna checked the kitchen before closing the door. Everything seemed in place. I lay in my corner, but I didn't fully relax. But after the scare, I knew. Even when everything seems still, something can still catch us off guard.